Karl Malone was 20 years old, impregnated a 13-year-old, got the away from her.
Karl Malone's legacy is, let's call it, complicated. Back in the day, way back in the day, before he even got to the NBA, he, as a 20-year-old college student, got a 13-year-old girl pregnant.
Was he 13 or 17 at the time? I think
he was 20 at the time.
20?
The moment the clip hit the internet, it felt less like a sports discussion and more like a public reckoning. 1 minute, the room was talking about all-time rankings, scoring records, and the usual nostalgia that comes with old NBA debates. The next minute, the conversation had slammed into something much darker, much heavier, and way harder to walk back. That is what happens when a legend's basketball greatness collides with a crime so serious that no trophy, no statue, and no scoring title can cover it up. That is what people mean when they say Karl Malone's legacy has a death sentence hanging over it. Not a literal one, but a moral one. The kind of sentence that never goes away because the facts never go away. No doubt. Now, it must be noted that charges were never actually brought up against Karl Malone, only eventually a paternity suit and child support payments, which he contested in court, and it was eventually resolved. For decades, the basketball world treated Karl Malone like a giant. He was one of the most durable scorers the league had ever seen. 36,928 points, 2 MVPs, 14 All-Star appearances, a Hall of Fame career. He was one of the great power forwards of all time, and nobody serious about basketball ever pretended otherwise. But the horror attached to his name has always lived in the shadows, waiting for the moment when somebody would finally say it out loud in a way the internet could not ignore. That moment came when Patrick Beverley sat down on his podcast and heard the truth in real time. It started like a normal basketball debate. Beverley was doing what he always does, talking hoops, talking legends, talking hypotheticals, and weighing all-time talent like a former player who still hears the game in his bones. When Karl Malone came up, Beverley gave a basketball answer first. He respected the game. He said Malone belonged in the top tier of all-time players. That part was easy. That part was what everybody expected. If the conversation had stayed there, it would have been another harmless legacy argument. But then the subject shifted from basketball to the part of Malone's life that has always poisoned the conversation. And that is when everything broke. And that was the All-Star game last year. The 75 best players in the history of the league. Karl Malone was on the list, was a no-show, he didn't want all the heat. Well, now it's in his backyard and I guess he's agreed to do this. The words that froze Beverley were short and devastating. He got a young one pregnant. That was the sentence that emptied the room. Beverley's face changed instantly. The smile disappeared. The posture stiffened. And all that podcast confidence evaporated. He asked for a full timeout like a man trying to stop a train with his hands. He needed a moment to process what he had just heard, because the information was so far beyond the usual sports banter that his brain could not catch up fast enough. He asked the obvious question next, hoping there had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Was he 16? Was he a teenager, too? The answer came back cold and clean. He was 20. And that was the end of the defense. That is the part that made the clip explode. It was not a planned takedown. It was not a rant. It was a human being learning in real time that one of the names he had spent a career admiring carried a history far uglier than he had ever heard. Beverley did what the public often does not do. He reacted honestly. He did not pretend the information was neutral. He did not try to soften it into a vague off-court controversy. He said what the rest of the room was thinking. That does not seem cool to me. No one in that studio could argue with that, because the facts were already too ugly to spin. I'm surprised he accepted, but I'm more surprised that the NBA invited him, and they really probably couldn't go to John Stockton because there's controversy surrounding him as well and some of the comments that he's made. Then came the second wave of reaction, and this one was even quieter, which somehow made it louder. Victor Wembanyama, one of the brightest young stars in the sport, saw the NBA account post a birthday tribute to Malone and showed silence with a blade inside it. He did not post a long thread. He did not write an essay. He simply reposted a fan response that made the disgust obvious without him ever having to explain himself. That kind of move lands differently when it comes from a young player with almost universal appeal. Wembanyama did not need to say, "I reject this." He made the repost say it for him. And because he's from the generation that grew up with full internet visibility, full access to receipts, and very little patience for old league hush money energy, his silent cosign felt like a generational reset. Now, Karl Malone's not in jail. He hasn't been convicted of anything. And we're not saying any of that. I don't want anybody to misconstrue what we're talking about. But it's about the league, and sometimes it's about the optics, and when you're a corporation, sometimes even though you know nobody's done or been proven to do anything wrong. That is the real story here. The older era protected these myths. The basketball machine loved Malone's points. Loved the toughness. Loved the rugged Utah years. Loved the postseason battles with Stockton. Loved the dream team history. What it did not love was the truth that sat underneath all that. Malone was 20 and impregnated a 13-year-old. Court verified, DNA confirmed, legally settled. The facts have been in the public record for years. But the league has behaved as though the basketball resume could sit in a separate universe from the personal crime. That separation is exactly what this new generation is refusing to accept. And it matters that the people now reacting are not random internet commentators. Patrick Beverley is a veteran who has lived inside NBA locker rooms. Wembanyama is a franchise cornerstone and a face of the next era. Their reactions are not gossip. They are a sign that the league's silence is cracking. Once the younger players stop quietly acknowledging what happened, the old rituals of polite ignorance stop working. You can no longer just say, "Well, he was a great player," and leave it there. The game itself starts asking harder questions. Should the NBA keep celebrating him? Should awards still bear his name? Should birthday tributes still be routine? Should old statues keep standing untouched while the person at the center of them has never fully answered for what he did? From people who say, "I can't believe that he's sitting out here," like considering what we all know about him now, and maybe he was 20 years old and this is a long time ago, but we do know. The uncomfortable reality is that Malone's basketball accomplishments do not disappear. That is part of why this debate is so impossible. He was a monster on the floor. He changed games. He put up numbers that will live forever in the record books. But the personal legacy is not just a footnote. It is a giant black mark that does not age out. The horrifying part is not simply that he did it. It is that he denied responsibility, fought the paternity case, avoided the kind of accountability that any ordinary person would have faced, and then moved through life for decades as if the world had decided to look away. For the people who now hear this story for the first time, the shock is not only the crime itself. It is the scale of the cover-up by omission. There is a reason Beverley's reaction connected so hard with fans. He was not speaking as a prosecutor or a talking head. He was speaking like a guy who had never been told the full story. And that is the part that makes the NBA look so bad. How many current players, former players, broadcasters, and executives have been around this man's basketball image for years without ever being forced to confront the full reality? If Beverley did not know, then the silence has been working exactly as designed. It has kept the ugly parts buried beneath the highlights. The story of Malone's son adds another layer that makes the whole thing even harder to stomach. Demetrius Bell grew up without his father, without real support, and with the burden of a last name he never asked for. He later described the situation with a kind of bleak acceptance that says more than anger ever could. That line about his mom going to the sperm bank is funny only in the darkest possible way. It is the kind of statement a child grows into when he has spent years trying to make peace with absence. Bell built his own path anyway. That is the part that stings the most. The man Malone left behind made something of himself despite the silence, while the father who abandoned him kept getting honored by the sport. That is why the reaction from legends and younger stars feels like more than outrage. It feels like a refusal to keep rewarding the split between on-court excellence and off-court horror. The death sentence people talk about is not about Malone being cancelled in the social media sense. It is about his image being sentenced by the facts. No amount of points can scrub away what happened to that 13-year-old girl. No amount of old highlight reels can erase the paternity fight, the denial, the silence, or the way the league kept finding ways to celebrate him anyway. And this is where the basketball world finally has to decide what matters more. If you only care about the game, then Malone will always have a place in the all-time conversation. That part is unavoidable. But if you care about who gets elevated and why, then the conversation changes fast. Because a league that knows the truth and still treats him as harmless is making a choice. It is choosing nostalgia over accountability. It is choosing comfort over honesty. It is choosing to protect the legend even when the legend has been stained beyond repair. That is why these reactions landed so hard. Beverly's podcast moment was not just a reaction clip. It was a public unmasking. Wembanyama's repost was not just a social media gesture. It was the sound of a younger generation saying enough. The old script is breaking. The new players do not owe that old silence anything. They are not interested in pretending the off-court horror is separate from the basketball glory. For them, the totality of a person matters. And once that standard is set, a man like Karl Malone cannot survive inside the same mythology he lived in for decades. There is no neat ending to this story, because the facts are too ugly for neatness. The basketball resume is real. The crime is real. The damage is real. The long public silence is real, too. And all of it together creates the kind of moral collapse that no documentary montage can smooth over. The reaction from NBA legends is not just a condemnation. It is a delayed honesty. It is about finally saying what should have been said years ago. Karl Malone's basketball legacy may never vanish from the record books. But the story around it has changed forever. Every tribute now comes with a shadow. Every highlight comes with a reminder. Every celebration brings the same question back into the room. How long did the league plan to keep looking away? And why did it take this long for the people inside the sport to say the obvious out loud? That is why this one hit so hard. Not because fans learned Malone was a great player. We already knew that. It hit because the basketball world is finally treating his off-court history with the seriousness it always deserved. And once that door opens, it never really closes again. Share your thoughts on it.